The letter that arrived too late. October 7th, 2023, Springfield, Illinois. Margaret Ellen Browning was not expecting mail that day, certainly not a letter that would turn her life upside down. The fall breeze scattered leaves across the porch as she bent to pick up the small, yellowed envelope the postal worker had slipped between two catalogs. It bore her name, but the handwriting stopped her cold. Her father's handwriting, and he had been dead for over a year. The postmark read August 25th, 2022, and in the top left corner, the sender's name, Robert Browning, her father. She stood motionless for a moment, her garden gloves still on, her breath caught between disbelief and dread. Slowly, she walked inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the letter like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. The envelope was thin, creased, weathered, like it had traveled a long, uneven road to find her. Her fingers trembled as she slid a butter knife under the seal. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper. And her father's voice came flooding back, not in sound, but in rhythm, tone, phrasing, the way he used commas, the way he underlined certain words for feeling, not for grammar. She read, "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I failed to get it to you before my time ran out. I always meant to hand it to you myself, face to face, but time, as I've learned, does not wait until we're ready. It just goes. I want to begin with the truth, not the version I gave you, not the stories I edited to protect you, but the truth. I kept secrets about your mother, about myself, about someone else, someone you don't know exists." Margaret stopped reading. The clock ticked above the stove. Outside, a bird chirped once and then went silent. Her coffee sat untouched. She put the letter down and stood up. For a moment, she wasn't 62. She was 16, standing in the hallway again after her parents' arguments, after her mother's silences, after the accident. The accident. Her mother, Elaine, had died when Margaret was 10, supposedly in a car crash during a rainstorm just outside Decatur. She had never questioned it. Her father had shielded her from the funeral, from details. She lost control, he said at the time. It was quick. She didn't suffer. Now, 52 years later, Robert was speaking from beyond the grave, and Margaret's hands were trembling with the weight of what he had not said. She sat again. She continued reading. "The truth is, your mother didn't just crash. She was in pain, more than I ever admitted. And I didn't help her. I didn't believe her when she said she needed it. I told myself she was dramatic, overwhelmed. But she wasn't. She was drowning. And when she left that day, she didn't plan on coming home. I've lived with that guilt for more than 5 decades. You deserve to know the truth about her. You deserve the chance to forgive her, or to be angry. I took that from you. But there's more, and I beg you to read on. There is someone else you need to know about. Her name is Lily." Margaret blinked. Lily. She flipped the page over. There was nothing else, no second sheet, just a brief postscript. "I never had the courage to tell you, but Lily is your sister." That evening, Margaret sat alone in her living room, holding the letter like it might speak again if she stared long enough. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not her husband Tom, not her daughter Emily, not even her best friend June. There was a silence in the house that felt deeper than usual, like something old and buried had been disturbed. She reread her father's words over and over again. "Her name is Lily. She is your sister." No last name, no date, no city, no clue. Just a name whispered across time. Margaret reached for the dusty old box her father had left her in his will, the one she had never opened. It had been sitting in the back of the hallway closet since the week after the funeral. She remembered him saying, "It's yours when you're ready." She hadn't been ready until now. Inside were photographs, letters, and a journal. The first thing she pulled out was a photograph, curled at the corners. It showed her father in 1969, sitting on a park bench beside a young woman with dark, curly hair, holding a baby. The back read, "Me, Janie, and Lily, June 1969. Janie." She flipped through the journal, scanning entries that spanned decades. Most were about Margaret. But then, in 1972, the tone shifted. "Lily turned 3 today. Sent a package. No reply. Janie said never to contact again. Regret comes in waves. I don't deserve either of them. Saw Lily once from afar in 82. She looks like Elaine around the eyes. I cried all the way home." The entries continued sporadically, always in fragments, always with guilt. Margaret realized her father had lived an entire second life, one built on silence. By the following week, Margaret had become a quiet investigator. She called the courthouse in Decatur to search for Janie's last name. She scoured public records and obituary archives. She created a profile on Ancestry.com and uploaded her DNA sample, hoping for any match with someone named Lily. Her husband Tom tried to be supportive, but he didn't understand the urgency. "You never even knew she existed," he said gently. "That's the point," Margaret replied. "I should have." The breakthrough came from a forgotten letter she found tucked inside the journal. It was dated 1985, addressed to Janie Ellis, Cedar Falls, Iowa. The handwriting was Robert's. Margaret searched the Cedar Falls property records and found that Janie Ellis had sold her home in 1997. A death certificate revealed that she had passed away in 2004. But something else stood out. In Janie's obituary, it listed a daughter, Lillian Ellis, born May 21, 1966. Lily. She had been there the whole time. Margaret's hands trembled as she searched online for Lillian Ellis. One result, a retired pediatric nurse, lives in St. Cloud, Minnesota, age 57. It had to be her. She stared at the screen for nearly an hour before composing a message. Subject: You may not know me. Dear Ms. Ellis, my name is Margaret Browning. I believe we may be sisters. Lily's reply came 3 days later. It was short, careful, not cold, but cautious. Subject: You may not know me. Dear Margaret, I've read your message several times. I'm not sure what to say. I never knew much about my father, only his name. My mother didn't speak about him often. I remember once, when I was 12, asking her if I had any other family. She said, no one worth knowing. But I always wondered. Please tell me more. Lily Margaret stared at those last 3 words. Please tell me more. She knew from experience that people don't say that unless a part of them is already halfway through the door. They began writing each other, slowly, like strangers, learning a language they both used to know. Margaret shared stories of growing up in Springfield, her mother's soft piano playing in the evenings, her father's quiet pride, the silence that settled over the house after Elaine died. Lily replied with her own fragments: nursing school in Duluth, a failed marriage in her 30s, 2 grown sons. She lived alone now in a 2-bedroom bungalow with a black lab named Murphy. She tended a garden. She read before bed. She said she wasn't ready to talk on the phone, but someday. That day came 2 weeks later. Margaret's hands shook when she answered the call. Hi, it's Lily. Her voice was lower than Margaret expected, gentle, measured. They spoke for nearly 2 hours. Lily cried first. I used to imagine my father would show up one day. I made that story up in my head. Like maybe he got lost. Maybe he forgot how to get back to me. And then I stopped waiting. Margaret said softly, I think maybe he never forgave himself. And maybe maybe this is what he hoped would still happen. 2 weeks later, Margaret drove 7 hours north to St. Cloud. She brought with her a cardboard box. Inside, their father's journal, the old photos, and the letter that had arrived too late. Lily opened the door. She was taller than Margaret expected. Silver-streaked hair, tied back loosely. Laugh lines, but guarded eyes. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 women, 2 timelines. One unspoken sentence hanging in the air. I missed your whole life. Then Lily smiled. You look like someone I used to draw in my head. They sat at her kitchen table for hours. Murphy curled at their feet. The box lay open between them. Lily picked up the photo of Robert, Janie, and the baby, herself. I've never seen this before. I didn't even know he held me. Margaret handed her the journal. It's not all easy to read, but he never stopped thinking about you. They read pages aloud to each other, sometimes laughing, sometimes falling silent mid-sentence. One page made them both cry. Margaret deserves the truth, and so does Lily. If they ever meet, God, if they ever meet, maybe they'll understand. Maybe they'll forgive me in ways I never learned to forgive myself. Lily whispered, I think he thought this letter would never find us. But it did. Margaret nodded. And maybe that's enough. Margaret stayed in St. Cloud for 3 days. They didn't rush anything. They made soup, took walks, looked through photo albums. They avoided heavy words like sisterhood and family, and instead let the connection form in glances, shared silences, and hesitant laughter. On the 3rd night, as they sat by Lily's backyard fire pit, Margaret finally asked, Do you resent him? Lily stared into the flames. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, I did. For years. But not now. Not anymore. I think I just felt forgotten. Like I was the story no one wanted to finish writing. Margaret exhaled softly. I felt like I never got the whole book. They sat without speaking for a while. The fire cracked softly between them. That night, Margaret dreamed of her father, not as an old man, but younger, standing on the edge of a field, looking back over his shoulder, waiting. When she awoke the next morning, she knew what she had to do. Back home in Springfield, Margaret found a folder her father had labeled, Legal, Do Not Discard. Inside was an old letter from a lawyer, dated 1980, addressed to Robert Browning. It referenced a quiet financial arrangement, small monthly deposits sent to Janie Ellis, proof that even if distant, her father had tried to provide. She scanned the letter, emailed it to Lily. Her reply came an hour later. I had no idea, not once, but somehow it helps. Margaret decided to tell Emily. They sat in her kitchen one rainy Sunday afternoon, the journal between them. Emily was stunned, but quiet. So, you have a sister? After all this time? Margaret nodded. Half-sister. Technically, but it doesn't feel half. Emily flipped through the journal slowly, as if touching each sentence gave her a piece of the man she had only known as a quiet, soft-spoken grandfather. Then she looked up. Why didn't you tell me right away? Margaret took a breath. Because I needed to understand it myself first. I didn't want it to just be a story. I wanted it to be real. Later that week, Emily asked if she could meet Lily. 3 generations met in St. Cloud in early December. Snow lined the streets. Margaret watched her daughter and her newly found sister sit across from each other in a small diner. They were laughing over something. She wasn't even sure what. She just watched and let herself feel the warmth of it. That night, Lily took out the original letter, the one their father wrote. She reread it aloud, slowly, her voice catching at the same place Margaret always faltered. Even if this never reaches you, I want you to know, I loved you. I just didn't always know how to show it. If there's still time, please try to find each other. And forgive me for the time I stole. They sat there, the letter between them, no longer too late. The bench wasn't fancy, just old wood slats and a brass plaque, half worn by sun and years. It sat in Lincoln Park, back in Springfield, a quiet corner near the duck pond, where Robert used to take Margaret when she was little. She remembered the breadcrumbs in her pockets, his hands steady on her back as she leaned over the edge of the pond. It was where he used to sit and think, and now it was where they sat together, Margaret and Lily. Margaret had the plaque updated just a month before. Now it read, Robert Browning, 1937-2022. He waited too long, but he tried. Lily ran her fingers over the engraving. Do you think he ever really forgave himself? She asked softly. Margaret shook her head. I think he hoped we would. A family of ducks passed by. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't ache anymore. Later, as they got up to leave, Lily hesitated. I used to hate him, she said. But I think I was wrong to. He was lost, maybe like I was. But he still tried to leave a map. That winter, Margaret boxed up the journal, the photos, and the letter. She labeled it simply, For Emily. She placed it on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, not because she was leaving, but because she had learned something. Some stories arrive when they're meant to. Some truths take time, and some wounds only close when they're passed gently to the next hands. She and Lily spoke often now, not just out of duty, but habit. They had begun planning a summer trip, just the two of them, maybe Michigan or New Hampshire, somewhere quiet, somewhere with lakes and trees and enough room for memory. Emily would sometimes joke, it's like you two are trying to make up for 60 years of silence in 6 months. And maybe they were, but neither of them was rushing. They were finally writing the ending their father couldn't finish. In March of the following year, Margaret was invited to speak at the Springfield Library for a local memoir event. The theme, Letters That Changed Us. She read her father's letter aloud, all of it. When she finished, the room was silent for a long time. Then a woman in the front row, maybe 70, whispered, That could have been my story. Another man stood and said, I haven't spoken to my brother in 15 years. I think I will now. And afterward, one by one, people came forward, some with tears, some with their own letters clutched in nervous hands. The letter had been late, but it wasn't too late. It had stitched together the broken ends of a family, reached across silence and shame, and reminded two women that blood doesn't make you family, choice does. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a beginning. Moral. Sometimes what arrives late is what arrives right on time. And love, when it's honest, doesn't expire. It waits. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us share more powerful, real-life stories like this, meant for the heart and made to be heard.